My phone buzzed at my husband's graveside. An unknown number. A message that froze my blood. "I'm alive, trust no one." I typed back trembling. "Who are you?" The response came instantly. "I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the children." I looked up at Derek and Chris, their hands still on my back. Suddenly those grips felt less like comfort and more like a cage. My blood ran cold. But wait, I had identified Philip's body at the morgue. I had seen his face, cold and lifeless. So how was this possible? The air at the graveside was thick with the scent of lilies and hypocrisy. It felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders with the weight of 45 years of marriage, now reduced to a polished mahogany box and a collection of sorrowful, insincere faces. My husband Philip was gone. A tragic accident, they said. A brake failure on a steep country road. I stood beside the grave, a black veil doing little to hide the hollowness in my soul, flanked by my two sons Derek and Chris. Their hands were on my back, meant to be comforting, but they felt like the cold, proprietary grips of heirs claiming their inheritance. Around us, mourners bowed their heads in artificial prayer. I watched their wives, Brenda and Susan, dabbing at dry eyes with pristine tissues, their expressions a masterclass in performative sadness. They were already spending the money in their heads. I could see the calculations flickering behind their eyes like numbers on a stock ticker. 4 years, Philip and I had been little more than a private, interest-free bank for our children. We were the emergency fund, the vacation sponsor, the down payment provider. We ate simply so they could live lavishly. Our old sedan was meticulously maintained while they drove new luxury cars. Our savings account, meant for a peaceful retirement filled with travel and quiet joys, was perpetually drained to fund their latest investment opportunity, or to cover a shortfall caused by their extravagant lifestyles. Derek, my eldest, had the entitled charm of a man who had never been told no. His wife, Brenda, was a viper in silk, her compliments always laced with a subtle request. Chris, the younger, was the quiet one, the manipulator who used guilt and feigned helplessness as his weapons, a skill sharpened to a razor's edge by his perpetually dissatisfied wife, Susan. They called it borrowing, but we both knew it was a one-way street. "It's for the grandkids, Tanya," Philip would say with a sigh, signing another check. He loved them, and his love was a blinding, beautiful weakness. I saw it as a slow bleeding, a draining of our lifeblood for those who saw us not as parents, but as a resource. As the minister concluded the final prayer and the first handful of dirt was about to be cast into the grave, my phone, tucked away in my handbag, vibrated silently. I ignored it. Who would be texting me now, at the graveside of my husband's funeral? But it buzzed again, a persistent, urgent pulse against the leather. With trembling fingers I retrieved it, shielding the screen from Derek's curious gaze. It was an unknown number, a simple, stark message on the screen that made the blood freeze in my veins. "I'm alive, trust no one." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. My breath hitched. It was a cruel, monstrous prank. Philip was gone. I had identified his body at the morgue, a sight that would be seared into my memory for eternity. Yet the message felt familiar. The phrasing, the directness, the stark warning. It was Philip's voice, his essence distilled into those impossible words. My hands trembled as I typed. "Who are you?" The response came almost immediately. "I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the children." My blood ran cold. I looked up at Derek and Chris, their faces contorted in masks of public grief, their hands still on my back. Suddenly those grips felt less like comfort and more like a cage. Don't trust the children. My mind reeled, grasping for a rational explanation. A wrong number? A sick joke from some twisted soul who had read the obituary? But a cold dread, heavy and certain, began to seep into the cracks of my grief. Trust no one. Don't trust the children. As the final prayer ended and mourners began to disperse, I realized something terrible. I had identified Philip's body at the morgue. I had seen his face, cold and lifeless. But as I stood there, phone burning in my hand, staring at the grave before me, a horrifying question began to form in my mind. A question that would unravel everything I thought I knew. Then I discovered the truth. The days that followed the funeral were a blur of casseroles from well-meaning neighbors and suffocating attention from my family. They hovered, their concern as thin as onion skin, their questions always circling back to the same subject. The will. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," Derek said, his voice dripping with false sincerity as he refilled my tea. "We'll handle all the paperwork. You just need to rest." Brenda would pat my hand and talk about how overwhelming it must all be, suggesting I sign over power of attorney to them. Just to make things easier, it was a coordinated assault, a gentle, smiling siege on my life and my assets. They saw a frail, grieving old woman, an obstacle to be managed on the path to their inheritance. They had no idea that Philip's 6 words had ignited a spark in the ashes of my sorrow. A tiny flickering flame of suspicion that was growing hotter and brighter with every condescending word they spoke. I played the part they expected of me. I was the grieving widow, lost and confused. I nodded vaguely, let them sort through Philip's less important papers in his office, and cried when it was expected of me. But at night, when the house was silent and the ghosts of my memories walked the halls, I would stare at that message on my phone. "I am still alive." It wasn't a literal statement, it was a code. It was Philip reaching out from beyond the grave, telling me that his spirit, his foresight, was still here to protect me. And the second part, "trust no one," was the key. He wasn't talking about strangers. He was talking about the 2 men sitting at my kitchen table, the sons I had raised, the men who were now looking at me with the hungry eyes of wolves. My grief began to change. The soft, aching sadness started to crystallize, hardening into something else. It was rage. A cold, quiet rage that settled deep in my chest like a block of ice. How could I have been so blind? All the times they called, desperate for money. The business ventures that always failed. The emergencies that always coincided with a planned resort vacation. Philip had seen it. He must have. He was a meticulous man, a planner, an engineer who saw the world in terms of cause and effect, stress points and structural failures. He must have seen the fatal flaw in the architecture of our own family. The message was his final failsafe, a dead man's switch designed to activate upon his death, and warn me of the impending collapse. The awakening was not a sudden lightning strike but a slow, brutal dawn. I started digging. Late at night, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury, I went into Philip's office, the one room my sons had deemed too painful for me to enter alone but which they had already begun to catalog. I locked the door. Philip had been a man of ledgers and files. While he presented a front of easy generosity to the boys, I knew he tracked everything. I found it in a locked file cabinet they had overlooked. A simple, unassuming binder labeled household expenses, inside page after page, in his neat, precise handwriting, was a meticulous record of every dollar we had ever given them. It went back 20 years. Derek down payment for first house, $50,000, Chris university tuition for Susan, $32,000, Derek bailout for failed restaurant, $75,000, Chris luxury European cruise, anniversary gift $15,000. The numbers swam before my eyes, a testament to our folly and their greed. I spent 3 nights cross-referencing the ledger with old bank statements, my calculator clicking away in the silent house like a time bomb. The grand total was staggering, obscene. It was a fortune. A life's work, siphoned away with smiles and empty promises of, "We'll pay you back, Mom." Seeing the sum written out in stark black ink on a legal pad was the final push I needed. The grief was still there. A constant ache for the man I loved, but it was now overlaid with a diamond-hard resolve. They had not just taken our money, they had taken Philip's future, our future. And now I suspected they had taken his life. I needed help. The police had ruled the crash an accident, a closed case. Walking into the local precinct with a cryptic text message and a binder full of family loans would get me labeled a hysterical, grieving widow. I needed someone who operated outside the conventional channels, someone who understood the darkness that could lurk behind a smiling family portrait. I remembered a name from a conversation years ago. A friend of a friend had used a private investigator to handle a delicate business matter. Mr. Stone. The name itself sounded solid, dependable. I found his number online and made the call. My voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop in the next town over. Mr. Stone was not what I expected. He was a quiet man in his 50s, with kind eyes that held a weary understanding of human nature. He didn't look like a character from a detective novel. He looked like a history teacher. I laid it all out for him. The endless financial demands, my son's behavior after the funeral, the accident itself on a car Philip had maintained with near religious devotion, and finally, the text message. I slid my phone across the table. He read it, his expression unreadable. I expected skepticism, pity. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "Your husband was a smart man, Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice calm and even. This message wasn't sent from a normal phone. It was sent via a service that allows you to schedule a message for a future date and time, triggered by a specific event. My guess is, his lawyer was instructed to activate it upon confirmation of his death. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was real. It was a plan. Philip had known he was in danger. Mr. Stone continued. "A man like your husband, an engineer, doesn't just have a brake failure. Not on a car he services himself. It's possible, but it's improbable. And improbable is where I start my work, for the first time in weeks." A sliver of hope pierced through my despair. He believed me. He took my case. His retainer a small price to pay for the possibility of truth. His first piece of advice was simple but powerful. "Cut them off," he said. "Completely. Not another dime." Their reaction will tell us a lot. Before I could act on his advice, however, a new piece of the puzzle fell into place. A piece I never knew existed. Mr. Stone called me 2 days later. "I've been looking into your husband's assets, as you asked. He had a safe deposit box at a bank downtown. Your name is not on it. But this is," he emailed me a photo of the signature card. It was Philip's signature, and next to it a name, Tanya Williams, but the signature was not mine. It was a forgery. And below that, in the space for a secondary key holder, was a name that made me feel sick to my stomach. Derek Williams. My son. He had forged my signature to gain access to a safe deposit box I never knew existed. Mr. Stone had already obtained a court order to have the box frozen and its contents inventoried, citing potential fraud. But Philip, my brilliant, forward-thinking Philip, had been one step ahead. The day after signing the paperwork for that box with Derek, he had visited his lawyer and added a codicil to his will. It stipulated that a separate, secret safe deposit box at a different bank, one only he and his lawyer knew about, was to be opened in my presence and my presence alone upon his death. The codicil also stated that if any attempt was made by my sons to access his primary assets before the will was officially executed, all verbal financial agreements would be rendered null and void, and the sums detailed in his private ledger would be deducted from their inheritance. He had built a fortress around me and I hadn't even known it. The next day, I met Philip's lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Gable, who looked at me with immense sympathy. Together we went to the second bank. The box was heavy. Inside there was no money. There was something far more valuable. There was a hard drive, a small collection of audio recorders disguised as pens, and a sealed letter addressed to me. My hand shook as I opened it. Philip's familiar script filled the page. He wrote of his growing fears, of conversations he'd overheard between Derek and Chris about his life insurance policy. He'd heard them complaining about how long he was taking to retire properly and free up the capital. He wrote about installing a GPS tracker and a remote listening device in his own car. He suspected they were planning something, but he couldn't prove it. The hard drive, he explained, contained all the data. "I hope you never have to read this, my love," the letter concluded. "But if you are, it means my fears were realized. Use this. Be strong. Live the life we were supposed to have. I am always with you." I wept, not just from grief, but from a profound, heartbreaking love for the man who had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. That night, I confided in my neighbor, Margaret. She was a widow herself, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had become a dear friend over the past decade. We sat on my porch, a pot of tea between us, and I told her everything. When I finished, her face was grim. "Men," she said with a shake of her head. "My brother did the same to my parents. Drained them dry and then tried to have them declared incompetent when they cut him off. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, Tanya. Sometimes it's just a convenient access point to a vein. You do what you have to do. You burn it all down if you have to." Her validation was like a steel rod pressed against my spine. I was not a hysterical widow. I was a woman wronged, and I was about to fight back. The first step was easy. I followed Mr. Stone's advice. I went to the bank the next morning and, with the authority granted by Mr. Gable, I froze every joint account I shared with my sons and canceled the automatic monthly transfers I had been sending them for years. I changed the locks on my house and installed a security system, the one Philip had been wanting to get for months. Then I waited. It took less than 48 hours for the first call to come. It was Derek, his voice a smooth, practiced bomb of concern. "Mom? Hi, I was just calling to check in. Listen, something weird happened. The transfer you send for the kids' school fees didn't come through. I'm sure it's just a bank error, but I thought you should know." I took a deep breath, the cold rage solidifying my voice. "It's not an error, Derek. I canceled it." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You what? Why would you do that? Is everything okay? Are you feeling all right, Mom?" The insinuation was clear. My grief was making me irrational. "I'm feeling perfectly clear, thank you," I replied, my tone clipped and final. "There will be no more money. Not for you, not for Chris. It's over." I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he switched tactics from concern to condescension. "Mom, I think you're overwhelmed. You're not thinking straight. Dad would have wanted us to make sure you were taken care of, that things were handled properly. Maybe we should have Brenda come over and help you with your finances for a while." "No, thank you," I said calmly. "I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs. In fact, I'm just getting started." I hung up before he could respond. The phone weighed 1,000 pounds, but my heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. It was the first shot fired in a war I never wanted, but one I was now determined to win. Chris called an hour later. His approach was different, laced with wounded sensitivity. "Mom? Derek told me what you said. I don't understand. Did we do something wrong? We're just trying to help you through this. Susan is so worried about you. She thinks maybe you should see a doctor just to talk." They were working from the same playbook, painting me as a confused, grieving woman who needed to be managed, to be controlled. "The only thing I need, Christopher," I said, the formality of his full name a deliberate slap, "is for you and your brother to respect my decisions. The bank of Mom and Dad is closed. Permanently." I ended the call. The next day they escalated. They showed up at my front door together, their wives in tow, a 4-person squadron of feigned concern. I saw them on my new security camera feed before they even rang the bell. I let them stand there for a full minute before speaking through the intercom. "What do you want?" My voice was flat, devoid of warmth. Derek's face appeared in the camera, his handsome features arranged into a mask of loving patience. "Mom, let us in. We're worried about you. You're not answering our calls. We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about. I said. Everything you need to know was said on the phone. Brenda pushed him aside. Her face a smear of syrupy sweetness. Tanya, please. We brought you some soup. You need to eat. You're not taking care of yourself. Let us just see that you're okay. It was a performance for the neighbors. A public display of their devoted concern. I knew what they really wanted. They wanted to get inside, to corner me, to bully and cajole me into signing whatever documents they had in their expensive briefcases. I'm fine. Now please leave my property, I said. The sweetness vanished from Brenda's face, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. You can't do this, Tanya, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You owe us. We have been there for you, and this is how you repay us. Susan chimed in, her voice shrill. Philip would be ashamed of you, treating your own family this way. The rage in my chest burned hot and bright. Ashamed of me? He would be ashamed of them. Leave, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. If you are not off my porch in 30 seconds, I will be calling the police to report you for trespassing. The threat of public humiliation was the only language they understood. They stood there for a moment, sputtering, their masks of concern slipping to reveal the ugly greed beneath. Then, defeated, they turned and marched back to their cars, shooting venomous glares at my front door. I watched them go, my hand resting on the cool metal of the new deadbolt. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. They had just shown me how low they were willing to stoop. Mr. Stone, meanwhile, was making progress. The data on the hard drive was a goldmine. It contained audio files from the bug in Philip's car. My hands trembled as I listened to them with him in his office. My son's voices, my own children, casually discussing my husband's mortality as if it were a quarterly business projection. The insurance payout is substantial, Derek's voice said, tinny and distant. But his portfolio is where the real money is. We just have to be patient. Chris's voice was softer, more insidious. Patience isn't paying the mortgage, Derek. And what if he lingers for years? His health is too good. It's not fair. It was sickening. It was monstrous. But the most damning piece of evidence came from the GPS data. On the day of the accident, Philip's car had been parked for 2 hours behind a derelict auto body shop on the outskirts of town, a shop that had been owned, until recently, by a cousin of Brenda's. A cousin with a criminal record for insurance fraud. Mr. Stone's investigation revealed that this cousin had received a wire transfer for $50,000 from a shell corporation 2 days after Philip's death. A shell corporation that was traced back to a joint account held by Derek and Chris. They had paid to have their own father murdered. They had tampered with his brakes and sent him off to die on a winding road, all for money. The plan for their downfall began to take shape. It had to be public. It had to be humiliating. I wanted them stripped of everything. Their money, their reputation, their freedom. I wanted the world to see them for the monsters they were. With Mr. Stone and Mr. Gable's help, we devised the final trap. I sent a formal letter, drafted by Mr. Gable, to both of my sons and their wives. It was an invitation to a family meeting at the lawyer's office to discuss the reading of Philip's will and the preliminary distribution of assets. It was the bait, and I knew their greed would be too powerful for them to resist. The day of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a simple, elegant navy blue dress, the one Philip had always loved. I wore the pearl necklace he had given me for our 40th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. I saw a woman who was about to reclaim her life. The cold stone of rage in my chest had been forged into a sword, and I was ready to wield it. They were already there when I arrived at Mr. Gable's stately downtown office, seated around a large mahogany conference table. They looked like vultures waiting for a feast. Derek gave me a tight, insincere smile. Chris refused to meet my eyes. Brenda and Susan were whispering to each other, their faces alight with avarice. They all stood as I entered, a parody of respect. I ignored them and took my seat at the head of the table, directly opposite them. Mr. Gable sat to my right, a stack of folders in front of him. Mr. Stone, at my request, was in the adjacent room with 2 police detectives, waiting for my signal. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Gable began, his voice formal and grave. "We are here today to discuss the estate of Philip Williams. Before we proceed with the will, however, there are some preliminary matters to address." He slid a copy of Philip's meticulously kept ledger across the table. Mr. Williams kept a detailed record of all financial gifts and loans provided to his children. As per a codicil in his will, these sums are to be considered advancements on your inheritance and will be deducted from your respective shares. A wave of shock and anger washed over their faces. Derek snatched the papers, his eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "These were gifts. Dad would never do this." Brenda's face was a mask of fury. "This is her doing," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "She's poisoned you against us. She's probably lost her mind." I let her tirade wash over me, my expression serene. "Philip was a very thorough man," I said, my voice calm and clear in the suddenly silent room. "He documented everything. But that's not the most significant discovery he made." I looked from Derek to Chris, holding their gazes. "He also knew you were trying to kill him." The color drained from their faces. Chris began to tremble. Derek puffed out his chest, a pathetic attempt at bravado. "That's an insane accusation. Mom, you've gone too far. We're your sons." "My sons," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "My sons who paid Brenda's cousin $50,000 to tamper with your father's brakes." I let that statement hang in the air, heavy and damning. Susan let out a small gasp. Chris looked like he was going to be physically ill. Derek's bravado crumbled, replaced by pure cornered panic. "You can't prove that. It's a lie." "Is it?" I asked softly. I nodded to Mr. Gable, who pressed a button on the conference phone. The speakers crackled to life, and Derek's own voice filled the room cold and clear. "The insurance payout is substantial, but his portfolio is where the real money is." Then Chris's voice, whining and greedy. "Patience isn't paying the mortgage, Derek. His health is too good. It's not fair." The blood drained from their faces. They stared at the speaker as if it were a serpent. Brenda and Susan looked at their husbands with horror, the reality of what they had participated in crashing down upon them. This was not a simple inheritance grab. This was murder. "There's more," I said, my voice relentless. "There's the wire transfer. The GPS data placing your father's car at the auto shop. The testimony of the cousin, who has already given a full confession in exchange for a plea deal." Every word was a nail in their coffins. The door to the conference room opened and Mr. Stone entered, followed by the 2 detectives. "Derek Williams, Christopher Williams," one of the detectives said, his voice booming in the still room. "You are under arrest for the murder of Philip Williams." As the handcuffs clicked shut around my son's wrists, a strange calm settled over me. There was no triumph, no joy, just a profound, hollow sense of justice. Brenda and Susan began to sob, not for their husbands, I suspected, but for the lifestyle that had just been ripped away from them. The public spectacle I had wanted was unfolding. As they were led out of the building in handcuffs, a local news crew, tipped off by Mr. Stone, was waiting. Their faces, contorted with shock and shame, were broadcast for the entire city to see. The aftermath was a quiet storm. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, and my sons were sentenced to life in prison. Brenda and Susan, implicated as accessories, received lesser sentences but were ruined nonetheless. I sold the house, the beautiful home Philip and I had built together, now tainted by the memories of betrayal. It held too many ghosts. I bought a smaller place, a lovely condo overlooking the ocean, filled with light and air. With the fortune Philip had so cleverly protected, I started a foundation in his name, the Philip Williams Foundation for Elder Justice. We provide legal aid and financial counseling for seniors who are victims of familial financial abuse. I found a new purpose in my pain, a way to honor the man I loved by protecting others from the kind of darkness that had consumed my own family. My life became filled with new friends, with board meetings, with the grateful faces of people we had helped. I reconnected with Margaret, and we traveled, seeing the world we had both put on hold for so long. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my balcony and listen to the waves, and I think of Philip. I think of his love, his foresight, and his final desperate message. I am still alive, he was. He lived on in the justice I had secured, in the new life I was building, and in the work of the foundation that bore his name. The pain of his loss would never fully disappear, but it was no longer a crippling weight. It had been transformed into a source of strength, a reminder that even in the face of the deepest betrayal, it is possible to find peace, to find freedom, and to build a new life on the foundations of truth. My sons had tried to steal my future, but in the end they had only liberated me from my past. I was no longer just a mother or a wife. I was Tanya Williams, a survivor, and I was finally free.